Before we begin, if this resonates, please like, subscribe, and share. It helps us grow the conversation and meet this epochal moment together, where something new is arising in humanity. Welcome to Portals of Perception and to the Universalis project episode 27. Karen, Kyriaki, it's good to be with you again. Welcome.
Good morning, Karen. Hello, Aviv. Good to be with you.
Yes, it's good morning to everyone. We're all in the similar time zones today.
What a new ground we're breaking. Typically, we're speaking when I'm morning time in the US, often on Pacific time, and it's evening in London and in Athens, and I'm coming to you live from Finland, from Helsinki. And I came here this weekend to spend the coming week working with the senior leadership team for a technology company. And the opportunity provided us to speak with each other on the same time zone. And yesterday we gathered and generated Universalis 25 and 26. 25, if we choose to publish it, will focus on, was focused and will be called something like the esoterically examined life, where we brought to life the practice of examining yourself and your life, inspired by the admonition from Socrates, who said that the unexamined life is not worth living. And we reflected on the exoteric, mesoteric, and the esoteric way to appreciate that, and then enter the practice of that examination, all inside the context of a sense of an appraisal moment in the Universalis project, to try to appraise what brought us here, where are we, what brought us here. And one of the technologies we use in the appraisal process is the trace of what led to what, not so much by just storylining, but appreciating the propelling energetic motivations that shape the unfolding and the arising of an endeavor. Episode 26 then brought to focus the study of the human predicament and its multiple stop situation scenarios. We looked at 7 very briefly. I swiftly ran through that. And there was one more thing that wanted to emerge, which we are approaching today. And my working title for this episode is Universalis 27, is From Blue to Indigo Planet. And I would like to try to make some pathways into this, and then invite your own appraisal and try to create a starter, really just starter summary of evidence. But I thought I'd actually see that latter part. So once again, I'm going to do something in the opening, then I will transition to something that will seem not connected, but that's something I'll transition to as a foundation for the central inquiry, and the opening is a seeding right to the inquiry. So that's the choreography of today. Where I thought I will start is just some reflective notations about this extraordinary place I'm visiting, Finland and Helsinki, because this country is cleaner than most. And okay, so it's got very rich nature and it's full of green, and it's surrounded by water, and that's one dimension of its cleanliness. And the second dimension of its cleanliness is the character of the nation, the ethos, has a certain convergence of humility, of being humble, and at the same time striving with fortitude to not surrender, because they were taken by the Russians in history, and they were taken by the Swedes in history, and they fought back to retain their national identity. So that's a second and a third dimension of it. And then the fourth dimension is that Christianization only arrived largely to the Nordic countries, the primary way, in the 10th, 11th, 12th century. That means that unlike the most southern parts of Europe that were Christianized earlier, that means that this part of the continent was able to retain for a longer period of time their ancient practices and mythologies and their form of spirituality and religions, and only in a later stage, in the 10th, 11th, 12th century, which we are tracking in the epoch trace as time where both green and blue were coming online. Because remember, in the trace of blue, we're seeing, and green, we're seeing the rise of early universities around about that time. And what that means is that they retain the national identity for a longer period of time, and something of its nature, something of that national character and configuration was able to bring forward to closer to the modern time its unique connections and its unique properties. So that's fascinating. And as I was contemplating this last night, because that's what I do when I visit places, I go about the place and I look at buildings and I look at nature, and I try to let the character of the place infuse my system to discover what it says to me. And what it brought was something that I thought would be pertinent in both your adjacent researches, because it offered a unique insight about the intensification of indigo, which is the focus of this episode. We ultimately ask, what is the evidence of the intensification of indigo? And I'm now seeding something about it, which is that it's very important to take notice that in how the sevenfold pattern we're tracking is not linear. And it's not as though these are stages. And it's not as though what actually the epoch needs is to move from blue to indigo. And here is the kind of the way that contemplation informed me last night after our fascinating recordings earlier in the afternoon. What it said was, well, do recognize that for indigo to perform its function as merging and transference of all that has occurred in the epoch, it can't just receive blue. It needs to receive the whole 5 fractals from before. Because blue is very interesting, and as we reflect earlier in the blue trace, blue has these concurrent propulsions. Blue brings the striving for justice and the impulse of freedom and liberation, and the adjacent impulse for regulation and building a system that can operate. And blue needs to bring those different dimensions, liberation, freedom, peace, justice, regulation, all together. Why? Because blue is ultimately the very important function blue has. It's where we humans come together to reconcile conflict and to find a way to operate together. So blue became a critical enabler of large societies and of the rising of the, the nation state phenomenon as it arose. And so the reflection specifically about Finland, in that here was a smaller country that was able to, for longer time, retain its identity and its unique nature, how critical it is that the merging and transference that occurs in Indigo is able to be energized and inspired and catalyzed by those earlier fractals, because one of the diluting or lesser or lower natures of blue is that when it brings together a large system, it homogenizes the unique differentiations. So, like the example of the 20th century was the European project, and there were good, practical, and commercial, and economic, and so on reasons to why to create a common market in the European Union. At the same time, we've seen the advent of Brexit, and we've seen other smaller groups in the last couple of decades seeking their identity and seeking their independence and seeking to preserve their line of culture and tradition, and almost as though saying, unconsciously, this is my interpretation, their response to Indigo and Violet, saying we do not want to give up, because as a new future, as a new epoch is arising, we will retain and bring the line that we represent to the new epoch. Now, of course, when you look at younger generations, and I look at the younger people here in the park nearby, the younger generation are in the last couple of decades, with the advent of the internet and social media and TikTok and so on, they are more alike to each other than they are like their parents. This is something I've experienced last year when I was in Singapore and worked with Chinese and Indian teams together, and how they afforded me that insight that how they still treat their parents in the old ways with deference, but their children no longer treat them in quite the same way. So there is that generational transition, that generational transmission that's being broken. So the specific insight that emerged was how in the systemizing aspect of blue, the one that also builds bureaucracies and suffocates the life. So that's the lower aspect of blue rather than the enabling, liberating blue. All of those are part of the blue system. What you have in those countries like Finland that was able to retain for a longer time their unique nature is a preservation that is defiant of the homogenizing. I don't know even if there is a word like this or I just made it up, but I think that it's understood what I'm saying, and using it as a verb, the sense that something is lost. Because truly, if you travel now the world, you see young people, and they are more often indeed more alike and no longer carrying the epochal heritage, which I suppose we could take as one evidence. For instance, in the summary of evidence we are looking to generate as to when I'm about to make the claim that this planet is becoming more indigo than blue. And I don't mean this necessarily in the color with which it is observed from space or from the moon, but more in the character of the evolutionary process that's unfolding for humanity. So that's what I wanted to do in the opening, and I'm about to make a transition to something you will feel differently before we circle back to it. I do want to make for you the space to comment on this with this awareness that I don't want this to now explode. I want to bring another layer and then bring you to explode with revelations. Well, not to explode, but to liberate revelations and insights about this. But let me pause here and give you a chance to bring your voice on this evening contemplation about Finland and Helsinki.
Well, just to say that I have been in Finland when I was actually a student in the university, and I remember something in the cleanliness in the eyes of the people, and the many lakes and woods and the saunas that people practice there as a in their daily routine, not just to clean physically and the kind of detox, but also mentally. And yeah, that's also the land of the Aurora Borealis and the Lapland. And I was very impressed and jealous also of their education system, that they have an amazing education system with the less hours and the less curriculum. And they give a lot of time to the children don't have to study at home. They do their assignments at school. It's an amazing system. I was really into it at the time. And yeah, you wonder how each land, what it represents, what is, and I'm very fascinated by Finnish music. So also the singing. Sometimes it's like fairies sing. It's very, very special, almost angelic, I would say. It's very, very unique. So yeah, next time you tell us earlier, right? We'll join you live.
Yeah.
Yeah. Thank you, Kyriaki. Karen, any thought from you?
I've never been to Finland, but recently I went to Dubrovnik, and it was interesting in the way that you described sensing and having an awareness of the place, not from, as we've talked about in previous episodes, trying to understand how to look at things from different perspectives, and be a little bit more, in a way, bring in the understandings of the spectrum, not as the way we've talked about them, we've learnt about them, but how to apply them and see how they be a bit forensic into what is at play. And Dubrovnik was an extraordinary, and I'm still in the process of writing it up, it was an extraordinary example of the blue operating system. Very cool and a very contained, beautiful place. And how they managed to, with masterful diplomacy, keep the Ottoman Empire at bay and the Venetians at bay, and be very, very successful in what is part of their indigo overlay, in their trading and their merging and their meeting with, well, right at this, they ranged far and wide. This isn't the platform for Dubrovnik, but interesting at the moment, it's kind of, I feel, poised in time. And you're talking about the homogenous aspect. I mean, it is a tourist, it's almost becoming a living museum, which is a kind of transient time. I don't think it would stay that way forever. And when I think about the homogeneous nature, it's almost like the times, and I might be jumping ahead a little bit here, but something about the times moving on is that things break more into their elements. So if you're talking about young people throughout the planet, then the elements are the kind of core things that will connect them, you know, not so much the history and traditions and the families, but it's almost like the things are breaking into their elements and reconfiguring in different ways. But I won't say any more about that because I feel I'm nudging into different territory.
Well, you're inviting us into the broader research of national character in different countries through the lens of the sevenfold natures, which is something to integrate when we can. Let me take this and so bring just very briefly. This is one image that I asked the AI engine to produce an image that will communicate the myth and the mythology of the Scandinavian Nordic character. And obviously in this case it's the tree of life. I'm not sure how to pronounce the name of the tree of life in that language, but you get something about the colors and the mood which reflects Kyriaki, what you spoke to in the nature of music and the nature of fairies. And you get a sense that the presence of that lived in this land is relatively, in comparison to many other parts in the world, especially the northern part here, which is not where I'm visiting, but as I sense into it, what you alluded to when you talked about Lapland and the Aurora Borealis, that place is as close to true to its character as perhaps any place you'd find anywhere on the planet. Apart from maybe if you go to all the way to the North Pole. So, and here is another image. I asked the AI engine to produce an image that will resemble the mythology and the mood of the place, and you get the color and the tone and the way of it. So I'm beginning to here use what I'm about to try to go into. Because, but let me now bring this slide, which is okay. So we're calling this from blue to Indigo Planet, and that's the last slide I have for today. That's the image that accompanies that. So it is still a blue planet, but it's becoming increasingly more indigo. And I thought, what might be a way to approach this? Well, how do we mean becoming more indigo? Is there a way to provide access to it? Because what we're talking about is not a concept, but what we will assert is an energetic actuality, a process actuality, a configuration actuality in what's occurring with humanity, what's occurring with human consciousness, with human process, with human interiority, and with inter-person, and in the largest global scale as well, as we touched, in terms of what's happening in human affairs on the planet. And in which we will assert that there is an evolutionary permission and possibility, and there is also a below the line conditioned translation, especially when the potential is not used, utilized, applied in its higher sourcing, original nature, character. So, okay, so these are big statements, and my brief for myself now was to try to create an earlier, more foundational pathway. If somebody tries to understand and come along for the discovery, what might be a way to offer a pathway? Because one of the stop situations we reflected on yesterday when we recorded Universalis 26, and is addressed in several ways in our earlier explorations, and is addressed deeply in a couple of the portals into the soul work, is the stop situation that arose when science made the turn to privilege the exterior world, to exteriorize knowledge, and in a way separated us from access to interior subtle registrations and senses, and anchored our perception increasingly more in the physical, in the material universe, such that today a modern frame of mind is largely preoccupied with material things. Now, it's not that it wasn't preoccupied with material things in the past, it was, but the non-material in the ancient world was more nearby, was more permeating the material. So if you make a claim today to anything other than the physical and the material, you would find resistance with many people. And the question is, what assistance can be afforded, which is what I'm about to attempt to do, to talk us through several moves, all of which is adjacent to the inquiry of Indigo. And when I complete these moves, I don't know that I will persuade everybody, but I would have given some more assistance to what does it mean when we talk about the nature of the land, presence of the land, or when in another conversation I talked about sensing presences. And so here is the way I'm approaching it. Well, so if somebody claims that that human system is merely physical life, the first step we will propose is, so look at this physical body that we each are inhabiting, and you see the physical, biological, exterior features. You obviously don't see the interior part of the body. And even more so, you can see the interior part of the body when you cut it and open it for surgery, so you can see these parts. But even when you cut and see the internal organs, you won't see the feelings of that person. You won't have easy visual access to the actuality that each person is experiencing: joy and pain and struggle and agitation and happiness and love and grief and longing and hope, and all those vast range of feelings and experiences that are part of the human experience. So where are they? Because we don't see them in the physical actuality, although you could say, well, many of those get expressed in various behaviors and gestures and facial expressions and so on, such that you can actually know whether a person is happy or sad because they reveal some of it on their face. But if a person decided to hide and conceal and not reveal their feelings, you wouldn't know. And even if you cut into their liver or their lungs, you wouldn't know. if you claim that all of it is merely brain chemistry, well, brain chemistry may very well be part of it, but it would be difficult to put it all for brain chemistry. And even if it is all accompanied by brain chemistry, what catalyzes the brain chemistry? What are the energetic impulses, and where are they sourced, and where do they originate? So, okay, suppose you're not convinced yet. Suppose you say, I am still in the camp of seeing the human as a purely physicalist expression, which in the ancient world would be laughed at, because they perceived life to be permeated with natures that were angelic. But we're living in a modern world, we're not living in the ancient world. So we've now described two layers. We're describing that there is the physical body we each live in, and there are those feelings and emotions and energetic natures that we are experiencing. And the physical machine and the brain process these different energies. It's like a violin or like a flute or like any musical instrument. You can play a different tone. You can play high tones and low tones, and you can play different melodies. Such is the case with the human machinery. But you say you say, well, tell me more, please. What else can you say that will help access the realization that there are invisible, subtle natures to human life? Well, so a layer below the feelings and emotions and natures of experiences, there is what we will describe as a deeper layer, is the character of the person. What is the character of the person? What is the inherent worldview and mindset that is part of that character and those foundational tendencies that show up with each person in their unique configuration? Where will you place that? Well, so because that begins to describe that there is another layer, and I'm quite specifically here actually in what I'm doing today here. I'm not going to use names or other names to describe this, and even not going to bring the soul into this. I'm going to leave the soul and the spirit outside of this. I'm going to simply suggest that there is the physical body, there is a layer that's already invisible of feelings and emotions and energetic natures. There is a third layer which describes the character and also the unique competencies and talents and capabilities of each person. And then there is the fourth layer that I'll suggest is more the essence of that person, where you can look at each person and feel and sense and experience that there is a unique something about them. So how about that as the first journey away from the orthodoxy and the dogmatism that life begins and ends with the physical form? Because when you begin to consider that about human life, that we live in a physical body and we have feelings and experiences that produce emotions and which we feel with particular natures, and that we develop through our life unique set of patterns that become part of our character, and that underlying that there is something else, more the essence of that person, that yes, at certain times we will talk about as the trilogy of the soul, the spirit, and the unique self, the true self. Once we begin to look at a human with these eyes, we can also begin to look at everything else around us that it has different layers. So we can begin to look at nature and see the different topographies and different land masses and different geographies will have different energetic natures to them. When you travel to the desert, and not all deserts are the same, but I'll just generalize now. When you travel to the desert, you experience something very different from the lush green that I experience here in Finland or in the Pacific Northwest. So there are different land masses, and obviously, anywhere you go where you can get close to the ocean, you will have the unique experience of that ecosystem. So we're beginning to see and discover, once we apply these lens, that ecosystem by ecosystem by ecosystem, as you travel, as you go to the Amazon forest, as you go to, in the place that I call home in the Pacific Northwest, and you travel to the Olympic Peninsula, which is the one of the unique areas in North America where you have a rainforest. That ecosystem is totally unique. And you begin to see that, as it is true that you have different species of trees and different plants and different huge variety of life forms in the animal kingdom, that they represent in each case more than purely the physical form, that they each carry a unique energetic nature. Each creature in the animal kingdom is an expression of the unique energetic form of that species, whether it's a squirrel or a deer or a tiger, or whether it's a dolphin or an eagle. Any one of those forms has its own unique. So I'm describing now that every ecosystem and every nature of land has its own energetic quality, which you can begin to see and feel and experience in a variety of different ways. And every form of plant life and animal life also has its own unique nature. And then we can add to it that you can visit each of those ecosystems in different seasons, and in each season you will experience not just the change of the season, but the change of the energetic forms that accompany and, if you like, liberate and bring to life the expression of that season. In other words, inviting us to the recognition that the brainwashing that we received in school in the modern world, that planets and celestial bodies are just physical body floating in space, is the reductionist dogmatism of science. And we love that science enables us all the wonderful ways to measure so much. But what we don't love and what we miss is what is left out, which is the recognition that this planet is a living being in so many different ways. She is not merely a rock floating in space. She is a living being supporting in her ecology many huge diversity of ecosystems and life forms. And there is something about this planet that has the know-how and the capacity to enable that, and there is the essence of the planet itself that holds the energetic permission for all these diverse life forms to appear. And that when you take one more step in this contemplation, you look outside, as I look through the window in this hotel in Helsinki, and you see that now the sky is blue and the sun has come out. We say the sun has come out, but what it really means is that the sunlight is permeating the planetary ecology all the days of the year. Even in the dark days, something is coming through. And that whatever I just described about the planet is also true for the sun. The sun is not just a chain reaction of nuclear explosions that emit tremendous amount of energy. The sun and the planet are living beings with subtle energetic forms. And as I'm describing that we humans live inside a subtle energetic form, and all living forms, living beings around us have a subtle energetic form, so is the case about the planet and the sun. So I'm really working here to reintegrate what for some will appear to be ancient mythologies, but for the esoterically initiated is not just ancient, but is current way of seeing the solar system and celestial bodies. And I went through this entire trace to suggest the following, that when we describe the epochal pattern and the sevenfold natures, they are not a concept, they are not an invention, they are release and activation of subtle energetic potential that are energetically sourced in the cosmology that the galaxy is. So therefore, when we suggest that humanity is moving from more a blue planet into living into an indigo planet, what we are, I made this trace, this journey to try to suggest that one way to contemplate this is that this ecology we're living inside of is permeated and imbued by new energies, new subtle forms, new subtle energies, new solar and galactic conductivities. And that there's so much that we experience with the advent of modernity is catalyzed and inspired by that. So I'm making here a few leaps that if you're purely reductionist in your reasoning, you'd say, well, I don't know how you made that leap. Because if you are gonna try to sense and feel, not just with the brain, but with a sense of intuition, the significance of what we are trying to invite the recognition of, which is we are moving more into indigo times, then each of the pathways and each of the windows I highlighted could be an entry point. For some, it will be more through the recognition that the human has these multi-layers. For others, it will be more through the appreciation of something magical that they experience in nature and how they experience something different in the quietness of the desert to what they experience in the wind, in the green lush forest. Okay, so suppose you said, I'm with you, Aviv, I want to learn more. What is the next step in what you are inviting us into? And so that would be the one more step I will make, and then we will leave this as a seed to come back to in the future, and we'll swing back to the inquiry of indigo. Well, we just recorded and it will be released before this conversation is released, a new iHow episode where we begin to explore the subtle new sense organs that are latent and are coming online. And specifically, we explore the many different natures of touch: physical touch, energetic touch, and mental touch. So the seeds that are not fully developed now to full maturation, but we will plant here and we will come back to in the future, is based on the appreciation that we addressed in a much earlier Universalis conversations. Maybe it was in 5 or 6, and is also is addressed in one of the portals into the soul events, where we talked about the 3 portals of knowing and described the sensory somatic way of knowing, the mental portal to knowing, and the spiritual portal to knowing. And what I'm proposing today is that to gain access, to get to know, to get to feel, to begin to experience the subtle world, the subtle realms, one can make entry through each of the 3 portals. What specifically we explored in iHow 8 is the activation of the subtle experience of touch. So in this case, what we have done, we are potentizing the 5 senses to get beyond the 5 senses in their regular physical sense into the subtle potential that is latent in each of the 5 senses. Each of the 5 senses beyond the physical dimension, they each carry the potential of a subtle dimension. And there are practices and ways to activate that and to begin to, as described in one of the soul chapters, activate the sight that sees the energetic subtle form around a tree. So that's one way to come into these realms, through the activation and the potentization of the subtle senses that in each of the 5 senses. The second pathway comes through the mental portal. Because once you learn about how the world works and about natural laws and creational logic, and you deeply understand that even if you don't quite yet have the activation of those sense organs, you deeply understand why the universe and the world are organized this way, and why there is an energetic, subtle level of life that's hiding behind the physical form and permeates and infuses the form. Once you understand that, you have the deep appreciation. By cultivating that knowledge and the appreciation of it and abiding with that knowledge, it too, as it is potentized, will begin to open the pathway for you to sense and experience this subtle world. And what becomes even more potent is when you combine the mental portal with the sensory somatic portal. The third is when you bring the spiritual portals. And the spiritual portal, one of the ways it leads you into these realms is by the activation of special feelings. When you begin to see yourself and your life and other people with much deeper sense of appreciation and with a sense of reverence and awe about life, about the world, about nature, about our capacity to learn, about our capacity to overcome impossible odds. The deeper you immerse yourself with the appreciation, the gratitude, the awe, the reverence to the phenomena of life, to, in one way, its fragility, in another way, its extraordinary resilience and power, the more you live into these sentiments and feelings, because the portal, the spiritual portal, one of its pathways, one of its experiences is sentiments and feelings, special feelings. The more it will reveal to you these realms. So that's the inroad I wanted to offer into the subtle world, the experience of all living beings, and even what is not a living being, even crystal formations and rocks we can sense the magnetic nature of different rocks, and we can discover the different crystals and different rocks have a different tingling in the hand when you practice and sensitize your hands to feel that. So seeing and experiencing and assimilating and embracing the subtle realms as part of the greater integration of what life is, and seeing that all living forms and all ecosystems bring their nature, and that the seasons also play a part in that. And then inviting that we can make the discovery journey through the three portals, the sensory somatic portal, and the mental portal, and the spiritual portal. And I wanted to integrate all this to help us nudge into an appreciation that what we're describing as the indigo intensification is not a concept. It's not just about the world becoming more connected electronically through the internet. That is a technological translation and expression of the permissions that were activated with indigo intensification. So I now hand it to you with the impossible task of inviting you to say whatever you want to say. And you may want to initially comment just to that journey and do one round with that, and just offer whatever comes alive for you as you journeyed with me in trying to offer access to that, and we can do that in round one from you, and then invite you to offer what for you is the one or two most prime registrations and notations in your appraisal about the intensification of indigo. So please.
Can we have a round one in response to that and come back to number two?
Yeah.
There's two things going on in that I'm having some mental thoughts that link to all sorts of experiences in life. And the other thing that's going on is journeying into the essence and life configurations of what you're talking about. And I'm not quite sure which to talk about, really.
Well, let's just staying with what you said. You are demonstrating that you are responding to this from different lives within you and the different portals of engaging with this. So I'm fine if you want to bring all of them to the party and dance with those different lives, please.
Well, just one little memory turned up was I was once creating a collage of a kind of garden, or it was to do with a picture that had a phenomenal amount of colour, with an idea for children to look at it and then look for the colours in nature. And I spent quite a lot of time doing it. And then I went for a walk. And what I registered was that I was walking, that actual process shifted me from a normal, more singular, more historic way of walking into the woods. And I walked into the woods like I was walking into a painting. And it was kind of a shift of perception. And I called it God's paint box, because it was like everything had been created in the multiple layers and ways and colors and senses that you've begun talking about. And so that became a memory. I mean, I'm talking now from that experience, and I think it's the importance of it now is because it was a kind of demonstration of how we're all different natures, but I know I can be quite fixed. It's I have to work to shift out of looking at things in a singular one way. And the way I do try and do that is a lot through color and shape and pattern, and delve a bit more into the building blocks, as it were, and how they'd shift and change, and look through that lens maybe when I'm out and about a bit. I won't say any more now because this is round one, that it's a first
Right.
reflection.
Thank you.
I was caught. Thank you, Karen. And I often detect also the multiplicity of presences through music and voice. It's one of the things that, especially voice. But what I was caught by from what you were saying, Aviv, was that the feelings are a pathway or a portal to the spiritual. I find this very interesting because we often say, okay, don't have so many feelings. Also, being in Greece, of course, there's a range of feelings, and obviously, you're talking about finer, maybe sacred feelings that reveal the spiritual realms. It's interesting, in Greek we have this word hierophant, which is iera is the sacred, and hierophant phaneron is a person who reveals, who sheds light to the sacred. So it's like a function. And then I was thinking about what you said about the blue, allowing a multiplicity, creating coexistence, so that things can merge and mix and produce new. So, and I think also modern science is discovering the value of biodiversity, and they are trying to create environments that have the most possible biodiversity, because it produces more oxygen and many other reasons. And yeah, they found that if you have cross-pollinators like bees, if you have builders like beavers that build fences, and when there is not a big stream that destroys everything, so they build fences and so on. And also you have some predators that keep some balance, like the wolves, for instance, so that not all the deers will eat all the grass. So if you have these three different functions, it encourages biodiversity. And in tracing the indigo in our times, apart from the cryptocurrency and the social media, and I was thinking about that, for instance, my children, we decided with my husband that we wanted them to go to a Greek primary school, but an international high school, because of many reasons, mostly because they were more advanced in their education system. But what happened there is like that this was a hub of international influences. And they actually told me it wasn't easy. It wasn't easy to be, in a school with 62 nationalities, because you need to find a higher integrating principle. And I think we are in this stage as humanity. People know that. For instance, we were looking for universities for my daughter. And now the good, what they consider good universities anyway, they try to have as much diversified student body as they can, so as much nationalities. And they really try that in their acceptance and admission offices, because they want to create these hubs to get the different influences, which are very, very much felt. For example, the night before we had their graduation ceremony, and there was a young lady that was a valedictorian from Korea, and what she brought in moved everyone in tears, because it had this fine essence of the East, and she used her language, and it was so special in a Greek country. So I am thinking of this melting pot of influences. And I was looking at statistics, and about 4% of the population, at least what is recorded, is because of the migration, they are from parents from different nationalities. So this is 4%. It means 4 people in 100 people. So it's very interesting that this is going on. And what does this mean for the future? These different influences coming together. What are the challenges of it? Because there are challenges, as I said, for instance, in the school, it wasn't easy. But my sister that now went to my daughter that went in another university, she says that this is a big diary for me. This is a big privilege that I have experienced that. It's like I'm equipped with something that the other children that did not go to international school, they don't have. She cannot explain exactly what, but I find it interesting. And I think we are at a point of world citizenship. There are many, many signs of that. And I find that an indigo emergent stage for humanity. There are challenges in it, and there are great potentials in it.
Okay, so you're putting on the table a big exhibit A in the sense of world citizenship and the intermergence that we find, especially in the way it expresses itself with younger generation. So that's a great indigo marker, one way to see the indigo intensification. The reason I integrated this trace and pathway into the subtle world and the subtle realms of life is because I want us to, even though they may feel like two different conversations, there are more than just two conversations in this, but I integrated this because I want us to approach this inquiry not merely in the social, economic, commercial context, but to recognize that what we are seeing in these realms as evidence of indigo intensification is propelled, is infused by the energetic life that power everything that's occurring on the planet. So, and this is an inquiry that I'd like us to hold as part of this appraisal moment for Universalis as we will look to explore where we're going next with the research. Is there anything else here, Karen, that you want to offer? And it can be anything. We're merely making today an opening.
Yeah, I'd like to talk about etching, because we talk about self-etching, and being in the art world, I have some experience with actual etching, and it's a very interesting analogy. So very briefly, to actually create an etching, you have a copper plate, usually, or can be different metal, and it's covered in wax. And then it's a resist process whereby the wax you take away reveals the metal. And then the actual etching process is done with acid, so the acid can actually get to the metal. And then you have a sheet with an image on it. And with an etching press, it's inked and the picture's created. And it's the same principle that if you're doing a painting where you use wax crayons, and then maybe use a white wax crayon, and you want to wash over it with, let's call it purple indigo ink. Now that ink, it's part of the intensity, it's the analogy I'm creating, is that if that intensity is coming into an individual and they're covered in wax, stop situations, psychologies, not interested, all the kind of glue, then that indigo coloured paint, as it were, in the analogy, it can't get through. It just will wash off. If through the self-authoring process there are, and this connects with the sensing and the mentality and the spiritual portals, that things you've thought about, sentiments that you hold, values that you live, these are in a way the pathways where the wax has either been melted gently or cut through with kind of those moments where you have realizations. And that indigo paint, ink, can actually seep through, and it can actually become a part of your configuration. It can actually work through the patternings of your life. And as we've talked about, it can go back, or through your own process, you can look at your life in a non-linear way, and that ink, as it were, can reconfigure, rewire, emphasize, reinforce, embody core aspects. And what I feel and what I've sensed personally in this time of intensification is the ability to be more aware and more perceptive. And we talk about the spectrum, we talk about these patterns of humanity, and it occurred in this time that we're aware of these. People in history, they lived them, they experienced them. They couldn't talk about them because they were in them. It's a little bit like we can't talk about being a child so much from the story of going through. I mean, I'm in my latter years, over 70. I can look back now and I can talk about things and see things and shine a light upon things, see significant moments. in ways that I didn't necessarily notice when I was living through them. And I think part of the indigo awareness is we can look from greater perspectives at the same time as some of the key elements are becoming more delineated with this indigo ink, as it were. And I think the last piece of this puzzle, which brings in the spiritual, the sort of threefold prong, is that in a way the awareness of the, I think maybe you're picking it up a bit in Finland when you talk about the resilience and the character of the nation, the anchorage of the human to creation. There are parts that are indelible. They're not to do with our genetic, our psychology, or where we were born. There may be a veneer, there may be a warp, we may not see them, but they are there, else the human, I don't think we wouldn't be having this conversation today. There's too much that would have taken us out already, but we're here and we're ready.
Wonderful. So how about if this episode, this call ends with more questions and enigmas and mysteries than with any conclusion? Because we just seeded an invitation to research and discover the expression of the intensification of indigo in all the domains of life: art, leadership, business, education, interpersonal relationship, healing, and so on and so on and so on, where a main signature of the indigo fractal, the indigo pattern, is change, transformation, and specifically the intermergence of different influences and how they express themselves in all these core domains, in business, in commerce, in art, in education, in healing, in leadership. And when we talk about intensification, one way that expresses itself is the velocity, the speed of transformation. We're living into the transformative age. And so how about if we leave it there, unfinished, for it to be picked up with that added awareness that the catalyzing, the causing realms are energetic and subtle, and the inquiry we're making into the furtherance of the epoch story and how it culminates is not conceptual, is a living, embodied, actual experience. How about that as an unfinished, a mid-flight, mid-sentence place to leave today's conversation?
Yes. Thank you very much, Aviv and Karen, for the lovely analogy with the ink.
So, to be continued when we meet again. Thank you, Karen. Thank you, Kyriaki. And thank you for those of you that stayed with us through to the end. We're looking forward to see you on the next episode. Until soon.
Thank you. Bye-bye.
Bye-bye. Along with our website at portalsofperception.org, Portals is also available on YouTube and on all podcast platforms, as well as social media. You can become an active member and join the conversation in community events. And you can help us get the word out by liking this content and by sharing it with your friends.